Hey guys, and welcome to the shop where we go over frequently asked questions and tips and tricks to make sure that you get the most out of your Redline bow hunting gear. My name is Wess Brown, field producer and resident bow technician for Redline Bowhunting, and today we're going to be going over sight tapes and how to properly set them up on your Redline sight. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again, make sure you utilize your pro shop or one of our trusted dealers that you can find on our website. Now, if that's not an option, obviously that's why we create these videos so that you can be as effective as possible with setting these things up on your own. Now, there's a lot of rabbit holes and caveats that we can go into when it comes to sight tapes, but I'm going to try to be as clean and clear as possible and just give you the basic stuff. If you guys want any more in-depth information, just please shoot us an email and we'll try to create a video just for you. So let's just get started. Now, my way and your way may be totally different than what everyone's used to, but it is a way that is effective and it will get you out shooting with confidence and accuracy. Now, the two sights I'm going to be using today are the RL1 multi-pin and the RL2 single pin, which is my personal sight. Now, these two are very similar, but the multi-pin and the single pin, you sight them in slightly differently. So I will try to make sure to touch base on both of those, but just try to follow along. And again, if you guys have any questions, make sure you shoot us an email. Now let's use the RL1 sight just to go over a few key aspects to make sure that you understand the adjustments and the different type of terminology I'm going to use in this video. So go ahead and take a look at your sight. It should be pretty similar. On the RL1, this is a right-handed sight, and on the right-hand side, I have my yardage wheel that I can unlock or lock with this red locking knob here by unscrewing it. Now, I'm going to just unscrew it just enough so I can move this wheel freely like this. And then on the opposite side of that, you're going to notice a white sticker that's on what we call the yardage panel. And you'll also know that there is an arrow that kind of looks like it hooks around that panel, and that's our yardage indicator. Now, if you move a little bit forward, that's to a spot that's holding the rest of the sight to the elevation rail, you'll notice on the right hand side that there is a screw that you'll need an Allen key for, and this is where we're going to make all of our 20-yard elevation adjustments. So keep that in mind. So after you've seen all of that, we're going to make sure we have a few things before we get started and start sighting in our bow. Now, I'm going to assume that your bow and sight have been set up properly with a shop, or if you followed along with one of our videos. So we'll check that off the list. The next thing we need is a pen and a safe place to shoot our bow. Now, your effective range may be different than mine. I like to make sure I can shoot out to 60, maybe 70 yards. Maybe you don't shoot that far, or maybe you need to shoot farther. The other thing within that range, we got to make sure that we have a target, and we got to make sure that target has a bullseye on it that we can make sure our arrow is hitting exactly where we're aiming. So if it doesn't have that, maybe put a piece of tape or with a colored marker, draw something on there so that we have a reference point when we're shooting. Now that we got that all squared away, let's go outside and set up our target. Now, this is just a suggestion. It's not something you have to do, but I like my target to be at least waist high to shoulder height so that when I'm shooting on flat ground, I do not have to bend down or bend up. And I'm taking a lot of different things out of the equation when I'm shooting, and I'm trying to be as neutral as possible. When I sight my bow in, I want to make sure that when I'm shooting very accurately and I'm very comfortable in the shooting position I'm in. So you don't have to do that, it's just something I like to do. Now, once you're all set up and you have everything ready to go, you have the tools that were provided to you in the box when you bought your sight, and you have those sight tapes that could be inside. You don't really need them right now when we're sighting in, but make sure you have those. Now, my first few shots are going to be at 7 yards. I like shooting at 7 yards for my first few shots to make sure that I can get at least close to the bullseye, so when I move back to 20 yards, I'm not going to miss the target and lose an arrow possibly. Now, before we make our shot, let's go back to our sight, and we're going to take that yardage wheel on the right-hand side, and we're going to turn it counterclockwise so that it takes the sight all the way up to its maximum elevation. The reason why we're doing that is because we want to make sure we can utilize all of that yardage panel for our sight tape when we finally apply it. Now, once we've done that, we're going to move to 7 yards, and we are going to shoot into the target. Now, my goal for my setup is to make sure my arrow is hitting anywhere between 1 to 4 inches below the bullseye. So the trajectory at 7 yards is vastly different than the trajectory at 20 yards, but in my experience, I've learned that between 1 and 4 inches below the bullseye at 7 yards is very close to 20-yard mark that I shoot. Now, it may be different for you, but it should be a pretty good rule of thumb to go by, and you shouldn't miss, but don't hold me to that. I don't know how good of a shooter you are. So anyway, now as we're shooting at 7 yards, we can also make sure to pay attention to our windage, which is our left and right. We can make those adjustments here so it's a little bit easier when we move out to 20 yards. Maybe we don't miss the target to the left or the right, but you can do that as well. Now, once you've made a few shots, you may have to make some elevation adjustments as well. So again, those elevation adjustments are not going to be done with the yardage wheel. If you look at the sight, it's going to be done with that Allen key screw that is holding on the rest of the sight to the elevation wheel. Now, once you loosen it, you can move that up or down. So if you are missing the target high, we want to move the elevation higher. We want to follow the arrow. Wherever that arrow goes, if it's missing the target, we want to follow it with the sight, whether it be left or right or up and down. Now again, do not move your yardage wheel. Just make your elevation adjustments right there at that bracket point. Now once you've made those adjustments at the bracket point and you feel comfortable at 7 yards, let's move back to 20. Now this is where it gets a little bit different for you guys with the multi-pins and the single pins. The multi-pin guys, once you feel that you are comfortable at 20 yards with that top pin, we're going to lock that sight in place on that elevation rail. And we're going to do the same thing for the single pin guys. Once you feel comfortable at 20 and you've made your slight adjustments, you can lock that in. But if for some reason you're just not being able to finely tune it at 20 yards, you can use the yardage wheel to make those micro adjustments. We just don't want to make large major adjustments with that elevation wheel. Now that we're at 20 yards, let's look at our yardage panel and see where our yardage indicator arrow is. Now if you look here, my yardage indicator arrow is not technically in the spot that I want it. I want it on the top 8th part of the yardage panel. And to get it there without moving, because I know my yardage is 20 yards and my sight is set perfectly for 20 yards, I don't want to move the yardage wheel to bring that up because I just have to re-sight again. So all I'm going to do is take my Allen wrench and I'm going to unscrew the yardage indicator arrow and I'm going to move it to the top part of the yardage panel by just unscrewing it and moving it to an according hole that matches. Now once you've done that and you're good with your 20 yards, go ahead and take a pen and make a straight line from the tip of that arrow down to make a nice thin solid line from your yardage indicator, indicating that that first line is now your 20-yard mark. Now for the guys with the multi-pins, you're not going to do that. All you're going to do is make sure that your top pin is perfectly for 20. If you look on the RL1, you'll notice on the right hand side of the sight housing, you'll see where your 3 pins are connected, and you'll just loosen those slightly to adjust each one of them. If you need a little bit further assistance with that, please just shoot us an email and let us know that you'd like a video on that specifically. Now for the single pin guys, what you're going to do is after you mark that 20-yard mark, we're going to move back to 30 yards. Now a general kind of, I guess a tip, for me, my bow is going 301 feet per second and it's about a 1/8 inch gap from my 20 to my 30. Now I've done this a lot and I've done this for a really long time, so I already know that, and I'll just move it to that spot that I think will be 30 yards and then I just micro dial from there. Now when we move the yardage indicating arrow, when we move back to 30 yards, we're gonna use the yardage wheel. We no longer are going to mess with that bracket. Once we get to 30 yards, we're going to shoot until we feel comfortable that our 30-yard mark is perfect, and we're going to draw a line wherever that yardage indicator arrow is. Once we draw that line, we're going to move back all the way until you hit your max yardage that you feel comfortable in, and you're just going to continue making those marks. Now with the multi-pin guys, you got your first pin set up, you got your second pin set up at 30, and now we're going to move to that third pin, which will be your 40-yard mark. Once you get your 40-yard mark perfect and you feel confident that that is your 40-yard mark and your 40-yard pin is dialed, now we're going to make our first mark on this multi-pin sight. So if you look, we want to make sure, just like we did with the single pins, we want to make sure that that yardage indicating arrow is at the top part of your yardage panel, and we're going to make a mark right there. Now you might be wondering, why do we make a mark for 40 yards if I have a pin for it? But this is our reference mark. What we're going to do is, after this, we're going to go out to 50, 60, maybe 70 yards and make those marks, but we want to make sure that we can take our sight back up to its original 0. So if you can take that sight back up to the 40-yard mark, now you know that your first, second, and third pin are dead on. And when you move out past 40 yards, you're actually moving the bottom pin. You're moving the entire housing, but you're going to use your bottom pin for those specific yardages after 40 yards. So just keep that in mind when you're shooting. Now, once you've made all the marks out to the maximum yardage you feel comfortable with, same with the multi-pin and the single pin, and now we can move to putting the sight tape on the yardage panel. Now to do this, we're going to have to take the sight tapes without taking them off of the sticker panel, and we're going to have to match them with the marks we made. So people with the single pin, we want to match the 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. I suggest again to go out to 60 yards. And for the people shooting with the multi-pins, we want to make sure 40, 50, 60, maybe 70 all match up as well. Now a quick disclaimer. Sight tapes are not an exact science. Yes, there are some out there that show feet per second. There's some out there that have, the wheel that you can do a bunch of math and all that kind of stuff, and that's okay. But the way we do ours, it's just a reference point. Now, depending on your setup, your arrow setup, my arrows are going to be drastically different than your arrows, and sometimes sight tapes don't work out perfectly, and you have to get a custom tape. Now, if you're interested in figuring out custom tapes, shoot us an email and we'll go ahead and give you a tutorial on that. But we're all going to assume that all sight tapes that were provided to you, one of them are going to work for you. Now, with that said, let's move into trying to match up these sight tapes to the marks that we made. Now, you're just going to go ahead and fold the paper, and you can just put it close to that yardage panel. And once you find one that matches, or one that closely matches the best as possible, we're going to choose that one and we're going to place it on that yardage panel. But before we do that, we want to make sure that we took our yardage indicating arrow back up to our first mark that we made. And the reason being is because once I move it to that first mark that we made, we know that the sight was going to shoot, let's say, the 20 yards or the 40, and your pins are perfect. The reason why we do that is because when I put that tape on the yardage panel, and let's say the yardage indicating arrow does not match up with that 20 yards, without moving the yardage wheel, I'm just going to unscrew the yardage indicating arrow and move it down to the 20-yard mark. So I know that when I locked in my sight, it was at 20 yards. All you got to do now is unscrew that arrow and move it down to the 20-yard mark of the tape that you put on the yardage panel, and you're all set. So really, guys, that's it. It's super simple. It may not be a quick process, but it's an effective process. It gets you out shooting and practicing and giving you the confidence needing to get out in the field. Now, if you guys haven't done it already, make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and I appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you next time.